Today we'll be talking on the topic of solution to fossil fuels, nuclear, and why I don't think it would be other things like green energy. These are the topics I'll be going over today. Again, these are just my personal opinions. They are not investment advice. Please do your own research. Green energy issues. Now, I'd thought about making a slide for fossil fuel issues, but I'm sure everyone knows the issues with fossil fuels with carbon emissions and environmental, etc. So first off, let's talk about wind. Wind requires a huge initial investment for turbine blades, and imagining all those resources used and also energy to make those turbine blades and then lifting it high up into the sky, um, that requires a lot of energy in the first place and materials, and it's a huge waste afterwards. It's also not good for birds, kills a lot of birds. Um, and for the lifetime of a wind turbine is about 20 to 25 years. It usually lasts longer if it's on the ground instead of the ocean, where the salt in the air kind of corrodes the turbine blades. Next up, we have solar. It requires huge landmass versus the other alternatives in terms of energy. And it's not reusable after. The lifetime is between 20 to 25 years. And similar to wind, it has some non-reliability issues where, if there's no sun, then you don't have energy. If it's a cloudy day, rainy day, and how long, you know, that would last. And for wind, if there's no wind, then again, same thing, no energy. So that leads to battery storage. If we have sufficient battery, we could harvest the energy on a good day and store it for when we need it. But the problem is that requires so much battery storage to store, and currently we don't have. Imagine having to support a city for 2 weeks if it's rainy for 2 weeks, kind of thing. So that's why battery storage is another issue if we go the wind and solar path. For hydro, there's only limited locations because you require a significant amount of water flow, and it might require mass migration. So one of the example is for the China Sanxia giant dam that requires significant migration of people living along the riverside on the upper stream, and it also raises the water level on the upper stream. So pretty much everything surrounding is, you can't really live there. It's not feasible, but it is a much more sustainable energy source than solar and wind, and also more reliable because you can control the flow by how much of the dam you open up. The lifetime for dams are about 50 to 100 years. And in terms of solar and wind non-reliability, like a great recent example, just look at Texas, where because the years of investment into a more green energy like solar and wind, they're when the nuclear plants and other power plants were on scheduled maintenance, and it became too cold for the wind turbines to spin. There was a lack of energy, and Alex Epstein, a YouTube channel called Improve the Planet, does a very detailed discussion on the Texas example, and he actually called it from years before, saying like this is like one day we will have energy shortage, and he kind of called it. So, great channel to look at for that info. Now let's talk about nuclear energy. On the right, you can see a study of a chart from 2007 on death rates per energy production for terawatt hour. As you can see, nuclear is actually pretty close to the green energy in terms of the impact on human lives versus your more traditional fossil fuel. The lifespan of a nuclear plant lasts about 80 to 100 years. It is also zero carbon emission, and it's a great way to reduce nuclear weapons, where if you think about it, so uranium in a lot of the nuclear warheads, they can actually be decommissioned and used as a power source for nuclear energy, because that's what we usually use, which is uranium. So there's a lot of supply sitting out there. And in terms of nuclear waste, for past 60 years of US nuclear waste, it only created um, a football field less than 10 feet deep of any nuclear waste. So, it's actually not as much in terms of the carbon that's been produced from, for example, coal. And for the last 50 years, Greenpeace have done such a great job in shutting out nuclear energy development while um, using the alternative coal. And could you imagine if we were developing nuclear energy for the past 50 years instead of coal? You know how many lives we could have saved and how much more pollution we could have avoided? Now let's talk about some of the countries that are using nuclear energy. On the right, we can see that US is the most, right? As of 2019, I couldn't find like a more recent data, so I'm just gonna go with this one. Um, and if we look at, so for comparison's sake, I found two countries that were relatively close, France and Germany. France have actually picked up a lot in terms of nuclear energy reliant, where Germany has put more focus on wind and some solar. And we can see that right now France has half of the energy cost of Germany and only 1/10 of the carbon emission. And Germany actually, after experiencing the spike in energy costs and also blackouts, has actually begun more reliance on natural gas from Russia, which I have discussed in previous videos regarding natural gas situation. US, currently, again, the biggest nuclear consumption. Nuclear accounts for 20% of the base load energy consumption, meaning, 1/5 of energy in US is provided by nuclear. And it accounts for 55% of clean energy. And finally, China, um, they're pushing for more power plants, and as of, this is on wiki, so hopefully it's legit. As of 2020, there's 49 power plants, and they look to build more going forward. So the Biden administration, what does that change? So fun fact, 30 US states are currently being provided with clean carbon-free electricity from nuclear power plants. So the Biden administration have put nuclear as part of the administration's agenda, and they're pushing for more green energy, which again I believe will expose more issues with green energy such as solar and wind. And he's also pushing for reduction in oil production, which will increase the more reliant on other energy sources, or they just have to foot the higher cost of oil from you know, importing instead of exporting. So one of the bigger figureheads uh, in the space, like Bill Gates, he pushes for nuclear energy. He actually has more focus on using um, the nuclear waste as generator of energy, and his one of the company that he's involved with is TerraPower, who produces nuclear reactors, and he sees nuclear energy as a crucial factor to strive for carbon zero. So two kind of sources I found of him: TED Talk and a Wall Street Journal economic forum. So I'll try to attach these to the description. Feel free to check those out. Now, currently there's been a push for small modular reactors, SMRs, and if you take a picture on the right there, you can see the traditional nuclear plant versus the small modular reactors. So there are a few benefits from this, obviously. There's a lower capital investment, like it's not as big, so it's a lot lower cost to, build up and then you can enjoy the benefit after. And siting flexibility, again, because it's smaller, it can be supported to, smaller electrical markets, isolated areas, smaller grids, sites with limited water and acreage, unlike, solar, where it requires, big lake acreage, or um, hydro, where again, you need very significant amount of water flow, um, and greater efficiency, where um, a small modular reactor can actually cope with other energy sources, including both renewable and fossil fuels, so it gives it more reliability. And for more benefits, feel free to check out the U.S. Energy Department site on it. So I will put the link below as well. So finally, the only important question in this video: how to play this market? How do we benefit in terms of investors? Obviously, consumer, it is whatever the policies will come about, but how do we play this market? So first off, where do you find a commodity currently that has the second largest producer, which is Cameco, not mining? So Cameco, it's not mining, it's two mines right now, and along with the biggest producer, Kazatomprom, they're refusing to sell at the spot prices. So in uranium, there's the spot market, and then behind it, there's something called the futures market, but it doesn't really trade. It's more like utility producers go to these uranium miners to set up contracts, and they're unwilling to sign at the spot price of $30. The spot price really is not a good indication of where the market is at. It's a very small market, and it's really on these contracts behind the scenes. So don't look at the spot price for any indication. So there are two major risks. Obviously, if another nuclear plant meltdown like Fukushima, like we could put more focus on no nuclear power, and which could reduce the public sentiment towards it again, and outstanding supply, because it's not a very transparent market. We don't know how much outstanding supply is there. We'll see it when we know. So there's no other way. So it's kind of speculative. But in terms of fundamentals and mathematic wise, there is not sufficient uranium supply for the baseload energy, meaning so Rick Rule has a great example of this. 5 years later, if you go down to your garage and you turn on the light switch, will the light turn on? If it will, then you can bet that uranium, for example, wouldn't be at the price it is now, because it, again, accounts for 20%, 1/5 of the baseload energy grid in the US. So meaning, unless prices recover to where the suppliers are willing to accept, they will not mine, and those utility companies won't be able to provide energy. So first way to just kind of dabble in now would be looking at the biggest companies. You have Kazatomprom in Kazakhstan, Cameco in Canada, and Orano in France. So these are the bigger companies. And once the rally has begun and we're more certain about where we stand with supply and storage and more willingness in the market, then we can look at more speculative plays like Uranium Royalty Corp. So this one is kind of interesting. I think it's one of the only uranium royalty companies out there. They just kind of took the model that worked for precious metals and other metals, and just kind of apply that for uranium. In US, Uranium Energy Corp, they're their idea is, since US is the largest consumer of uranium for energy, but the problem is they don't have their own production. So uranium, UEC is trying to provide, in-house uranium supply. Next gen, Denson mines, ISO energy. These are more kind of mid-tier to junior kind of plays. And Valour Metals, much smaller entity, but it also has platinum. So these are kind of the speculative plays. Please do your own research. And finally, in terms of nuclear power, there is the research on thorium instead of uranium, where thorium is more abundant and it creates less nuclear waste. And I think this is something that India has been researching.